In this video, we are installing the pistons on this engine. The main thing that I want to go over in this video is that to install the pistons on cylinder 1, 2, and 3, the process is different to install the pistons on 4, 5, and 6. On a traditional engine like maybe a V8 or an inline 6, pistons all have the same assembly process. Usually, the piston is connected to the connecting rod, and you slip the piston into the cylinder, and then you tighten the connecting rod from the bottom onto the crankshaft through the oil pan. Because this car doesn't really have an oil pan, you can't access the connecting rod bolts from the bottom side, because once it's together, just the way the engine's designed, the horizontally opposed engine, you just can't access them. The process is very different from left to right. 1, 2, 3 is different than 4, 5, and 6. So 1, 2, and 3, they are going to be installed with the connecting rod attached, and then the end caps are going to be tightened through the exposed area. On cylinder 4, 5, and 6, the piston will not be connected to the connecting rod because we already put the connecting rods in when we were tightening the bearing clamshell. That will use a circlip method, finalizing the circlip when we put 4, 5, and 6 together. So here the crank bearing assembly is in with the crankshaft. It is in this side of the case. Now what's going to take place is the pistons and connecting rods are going to go in through this way. This leaves the other end of the bearing case exposed, so then you can put the connecting rod end caps on here and then do the same torque procedure that we did on the bench, but now we're going to do it with this piece assembled. You have to build it in sections like this because once one side piston is in, you only get access to one side of the connecting rod bolts, right? So that's why these bolts on this side, they're already tight. They're already done. And then there's a special piston circlip tool that Mike uses to access it through a different port. So there's two different processes to install pistons and cylinders in this engine based on which side is open. There's one process, and then there's a completely different process for the other side. This is the edge that Mike was talking about softening. So he took a little grinder and just hand ground that.
Exactly, take that.
Usually if a piston's offset, you can see it, but this actually, you can't see. Yeah, you can see how this side from this edge to that edge is less than this edge to this edge right here. That's assuming that these bosses are the same, which they appear to be. So it's just offset slightly. The center of the piston's offset slightly to this side. Just some nice heavy assembly lube there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. That, you know, most people use motor oil. This will not run off while the engine sits.
And then you're actually putting motor oil in there.
Yeah, motor oil on the cylinder wall.
And do you like the rings facing a certain direction?
Well, this has a pin for the second ring. You notice there's an anti-rotation pin.
I see. Okay.
So with the oil rings, it doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure there's not going to be any gaps. See, like the gap in the ring there? I don't want that in the gap of my ring installation tool. Arrow's going to point to the flywheel. Okay.
See how the journal's ready? It's ready over here to accept a torque wrench. When he gets to that point, he's not going to move the engine first. He's just going to pick which one is on the outside over here. And then he only has to move the engine twice for the other two cylinders.
I have the chains dangling and the rods are hanging out. It's kind of difficult. Okay.
Beautiful. We are gluing the case halves down now. To note, piston 1, 2, and 3 are installed now, and the connecting rod bolts are torqued. And now we're getting ready to install pistons 4, 5, and 6. So once we have our glue all set up and the crankcase is going to go back on here, there's going to be just a little teeny tiny hole to work through. So right now you have all this nice open connecting rod area, and it looks all nice and easy to access. but in a minute it will not be easy to access.
Okay.
You want me to hold that?
You can come hold this.
Yep.
And when I come with the crankcase up the other half, this is going to go through
That big opening?
the timing area, right?
Perfect.
And then pull everything through, and then we'll just set the case down.
So this engine case is now in the final stages. We have the driver's side of the engine. The pistons and cylinders are installed. The passenger side is now being clamped on to the left side. You can see right now, Mike's going around and just torquing all the small bolts, getting everything nice and tight. And then that leaves these 3 pistons open. These connecting rods are just bare right now, right? And now all the work, because once we slide the piston down through here, we're gonna cover this connecting rod. All the work after that, all the circlip fitting, everything is all done through that hole. Obviously you start with the very last piston over here, and then you work your way to this piston, and then this piston. You can't put it in this piston first because then you're gonna block your access to the rear 2 cylinders. This engine has a very precision, exact way to take it apart and reassemble it. If you miss a step, you start over again.
Has to go in there. We'll put the other gap somewhere over here. Okay.
Beautiful. The stroke length on this is 83 millimeters. So now Mike is preparing a micrometer to push this down exactly 83 millimeters. And when it's at 83, we know that the piston is perfectly lined up with the connecting rod, so the wrist pin can slide all perfectly through. So it's got to go at exactly 83 millimeters down. And what's holding our crank is that pin on U6 right now. So that's how we know that we're at bottom dead center. So if you don't line up this 83 millimeter marker, what can happen is as you're pushing it down, the rod can go too high, right? Or it can be too low. So say you push it down 85 millimeters. Well, now you have to pull the piston back up, which is difficult. It's not very easy. It's very time consuming. So that's why they have that mark in the crankshaft damper and the lock in the crankshaft damper with all the U5 and U6 and U4 markings. And then you measure 83, and then you align this. Now you're perfectly centered with the bottom dead center of the connecting rod. So too far, you got to pull the piston out. Too high, all you got to do is tap it back down, but you don't know when exactly. And with all this is all precision fit, so you don't want to start tapping on this wrist pin to get this thing to knock into place. You just want it to go fall into place like that.
Inside the tool with a notch coming through that slot right there. Okay. It's going to go in here.
Nice work, Mike. Some tedious stuff right there. So I heard that pop. That's a good indication that the circlip went into its groove. And right here you inspect through cylinder 5 and a mirror, and you can look right in there, and that thing is in. We do that to the remaining 2 cylinders, and this bottom end is done. The next thing, all you gotta do is put heads on and time it, and it's ready.